Man, this is not easy to do. Hey y'all, hope you're doing well. Today's video is going to be a lot different, and I want to preface this by saying that I understand that at this point in my life, I am coming from a place of privilege when we're talking about this particular subject. There are a lot of people who have addressed this issue in their videos, people who are van dwellers or nomads, and Bob Wells has even done a video on cheap RV living, and I think he did a pretty good job of encompassing the gist of what is in the executive order. However, there are things that really concern me. First of all, y'all, I've tried to make this video so many times and I get so upset and aggravated because of my own experiences. I want to encourage everyone to go and read it for themselves, and then read it again, and then read it again if you have to. It's not that long. It's very, there's a lot of legalese in it, but I think that there are some particular phrases or terms that we need to address, frankly. The first term that I want to address is civil commitment, because that is used quite a few times in the executive order, and I think that we need to understand what that really means. So civil commitment means that you have not committed a crime, but because you either have a dependency on substances or you have a mental illness of some kind, that means that they can court order you to an institution for an undetermined amount of time. It speaks about, there being step-down programs and things like that, but for no other reason than you are living in your vehicle and you have a mental illness of some kind. That means that they can institutionalize you. Now, what I would like to see is a little more of a clear definition, because things are so broadly stated in this executive order. I think that the reason that they did that is so that they can cover their tails when it comes to putting anyone into an institution, whether that be for mental illness or substance abuse. For people who are on the streets and genuinely don't have the means to care for themselves, for people who are deep into addiction and can't really care for themselves, I can kind of appreciate where they might feel the need to do something. As far as those with mental illnesses, like where are we drawing the line here? Are we talking about people like me who can still, pretty much function for the most part in society? Yes, I have CPTSD, I have really bad anxiety, especially when it comes to dealing with people or being in public places and things like that. But are we talking about, mental illness across the board? Because the caveat here is then can't take care of themselves. Where do we draw the line with that? Because some could argue that I'm not taking care of myself because I can't work, because I am disabled. Now, that being said, I have several disabilities, one of which I've talked about on here is lupus. But does the fact that I have to rely on disability, does that mean that I can't take care for myself? I want to know what their definition of that phrase means exactly. And when I say that I'm coming from a place of privilege, that means that I am in a position to where I am able to use an address that's not technically my own as my own address. And so whenever I'm traveling, I can say, oh, well, this is where I live. This is, I'm just recreating. I'm just traveling. This is, this is something I do for fun. That's not what I set out for. You know what I mean? I didn't set out to live in a sticks and bricks. I embraced van life. I jumped in, head first and embraced it, with every part of my being, not knowing that, a year and a half down the road, that this is what we were going to be dealing with. And also that part of things is privilege because I chose it, right? Not everyone who lives in their vehicle has chosen this life. And I would be remiss to not address that aspect of things. There are a lot of seniors who have been priced out of housing. There are a lot of people who have disabilities who have been priced out of housing. Their only options are to either get into a public housing program or to live in their vehicles. And frankly, I would choose the vehicle. But even that, those programs are pretty strapped. The way that I am going to do things is, like I said, I am going to establish myself with a physical address and say, this is where I live now. And I just do this, for recreational purposes, for fun, for travel. This is how I travel. And I think that those of us who are able to do that are probably in the minority as far as people who live in their vehicles. Some people aren't able to go and stay in national forests or on BLM land because, you have to understand that BLM land is only in the West. We don't have to stay in a particular area for your job or health care or what have you, then that puts you at a disadvantage because, you're having to find places. And I still see people talking about street parking in towns and things like that. And I'm like, I at this point, I would not do that, because when this really gets going, and who knows when that's going to be, but when it really gets going, who is going to say, who gets to determine, well, this person, this person takes this, or this person, deals with this, who gets to say at what levels, and if you are living in your car, is living in your vehicle enough for them to say that you cannot take care of yourself? And so I think that these are things that we really need to take into consideration. When Bob did his video the other day, he talked about, that you may not like it, but, I say that if you're in a city, leave. Paraphrasing, obviously. But I also feel like that, to some degree, is some privilege there, because, what if there's something wrong with your vehicle and you need to get it fixed and you're stuck in one place? What if, you are staying there because the gas that you have is the gas that you have until you get paid the next time, and you're living from paycheck to paycheck, just trying to make ends meet, living in your vehicle, and so you don't really have a choice but to live or stay on streets in bigger cities. And this is the part where I'm going to get a little personal, and where I have a tendency to get aggravated, because there are so many people out here speaking on this topic who also, either live in their RV or their van or whatever, and they're saying that people are blowing this out of proportion. If you have never been in an inpatient facility, don't tell me there's nothing to worry about. No. If you have never been involuntarily committed to a mental health facility, you have no business telling people that, people like me are blowing this out of proportion, because you don't know. You don't know what it's like to be in that position. And this is where I'm going to get a little more personal. I hate being vulnerable. I hate feeling vulnerable. Before I was properly diagnosed with complex PTSD, before I understood what was going on with me, I was diagnosed with all kinds of things. I was pelted with all kinds of pharmaceuticals and even underwent ECT, which is probably one of the most brutal things that I have ever endured, especially for sure as far as any kind of treatment is concerned. Some people swear by it. I do not. I think it's cruel. And when we talk about involuntarily committing, civilly committing people to an institution of some kind, what does that entail? That is not, there's nothing about that that is said in this executive order in terms of what types of treatment, you know, people are going to have to endure. Are we going to go back to, you know, making people have treatments like ECT and things? That's cruel. I think that, you know, there are other ways. There are other ways to help people who are experiencing homelessness. They could just as easily use the funding that they're going to use for this to expand public housing, to and still, you know, implement some of the things that they're talking about. You know, if you're expanding, you know, the programs that you already have in place, and you're wanting to help get people off the street, there are ways to go about that that aren't this. There are ways for us to help that are not harmful. I've experienced homelessness. I've been in positions before where I wasn't necessarily on the street. I lived in a park legally in a tent for about a week, and I couch surfed for a really long time because I couldn't afford a place to live, and because I was kicked out of where I was living. Again, I feel like I was kind of fortunate in those instances because I did have people that I could rely on. I don't have the answer. I do think that there are better ways. I think that, you know, piggybacking off of programs that are already out there makes more sense than just doing a sweeping executive order saying that we're going to lock everybody up who has substance abuse disorders or mental health issues who are living on the street, whatever that may look like. People are just trying to live and go about their lives, and I'm not naive enough to believe that there aren't those out there who are causing issues, who either have substance use disorders or, you know, mental health issues that they're not getting help for. I know that that's a thing, but that's not everybody. In fact, that's not even the majority. There are ways for us to be safe, and I also realize that that's not all encompassing. And I think that that is the gist of what I'm trying to say here, that we're not all going to be okay and protected. We're not all going to be able to establish a permanent residency, as it were. The worst thing that you can do, the most heartless thing that you can do in some cases, is to kick someone while they're down. And I really feel like this is something that's going to kick a lot of people while they're down, when they're just out here trying to live, trying to make ends meet, trying to figure out what they're going to do next. This isn't fun and games for everybody, you know. This is so hard. This is so hard. If you know me at all, you know that I have a big heart and that I'm very compassionate and also very passionate about a lot of things. And one of those things is mental health care. Because I know what my own journey has been like I mentioned before. But I also have seen the atrocities that can happen to other people. People who don't really know how to advocate for themselves. It's not that they can't take care of themselves. It's that we're not taught how to advocate for ourselves. And this is all in private settings, private hospital settings, I don't imagine that government-run facilities are going to be anywhere near as good. I can't. That's all I got. If you have concerns, if you have opinions, if you have insights that may differ from mine or whatever, go ahead and put those in the comments. Let's have a conversation about this respectfully. Hopefully we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming next week, but I thought that it was important to talk about this. Until next time, peace and bright blessings.